Okay. So, when did you decide you would not stay in Beloit? Was that very soon after Dwight's death, or did you think you would be there for a while? Or?
I knew almost immediately that I was not going to stay there permanently. However, I had always read and heard all these things about people, bereaved people, making decisions that they later regretted, and that I'd always read that people who are bereaved shouldn't make any life-changing, really big decisions for at least a year, until see after a year if they still were thinking about that. Probably they really wanted to do it, but that they shouldn't just make a decision while they were still in such a deep sense of bereavement, because sometimes they'd lived to regret it. So that's the way I felt. I knew I was going to stay there at least a year. But
and what was the church you were going to?
Went to a Presbyterian church at that time. And then, let's see, after he died, they came to see me again about teaching. And it's always getting jobs because they needed teachers, you know. I don't think I ever applied for a job after my first 4 years, you know, before I was married. I don't think I ever applied for one after that. They always knew I was a teacher, and somehow or other they would come around, and because that's what happened with Beloit too, and it's what happened at Florence, and it's what happened, well, actually that's not true, at Warrensburg. First time I applied, but the second time when they found out I was coming back, they contacted me and wanted to know if I wanted to teach again, you know. So frankly, it was a matter of some little pride to me that I got to be enough of a reputation that everybody kept telling, all the principals kept telling everybody, you know, and that's how I got these jobs. If the principals would say that, you know, if they knew I got this job over at Bueller that way. The principal at Bueller knew the principal at Beloit, and when Bueller needed that teacher, why, they were talking, and he said, well, you know, he told him to call me, and maybe I'd do it.
Did you ever think about getting remarried, or?
Not at all, never did.
Did you ever date anyone after?
Nope, never did. You know.
Did you ever want to?
No. I didn't ever think I'd find anybody that I wouldn't be contented with. And that may be silly, but that's exactly the way I felt, you know, and I didn't really think it'd be fair, even if I had some people ask me for dates, but I never did accept them, and I just didn't think it was, you know, I just thought if I went with them, I'd be just sitting there comparing what they were doing and what they were talking about, and their intellect with your dad's, with your grandpa's, or your guy Chuck's dad. And so I didn't have any interest. It isn't that I don't like male company. I like male conversation. There's a lot of times I'd rather talk. I like what men talk about better than what women talk about, to tell you the honest truth, you know. But I just don't want anything in the sense of a romantic. I never had any desire to have anything in the sense of a romantic, you know. I think maybe that's just because I was so darned happy that this was the reason that I was so utterly contented with Dad that I just never did think anybody else would ever even come close to living up to him.
So what about grandchildren? When you had grandchildren, then how did your life change?
Well, it got beautiful. I loved my grandchildren. And I'd been waiting for them for a long time, to tell you the truth, you know, because I was getting pretty old, and I began to wonder if I was ever going to have any grandchildren. And I loved the whole idea of having grandchildren, and they are and continue to be a great joy to me, and source of pride and happiness both.
So what was different that you could compare with when your own children were little?
Oh, well,
and
it's like they all say, all grandparents will tell you this. You can just plain enjoy your grandchildren. You don't have to worry about teaching them things or making them mind or all that kind of stuff. That's their parents' job, to train them up into that sort of thing. I don't mean that I thought grandparents ought to just let kids get away with murder, but on the other hand, you don't feel this terrible responsibility about them like you do as far as their behavior is concerned and getting them trained up and that sort of thing that you do with your own children. You just have fun with them, basically what
Do you have any favorite stories of your grandchildren?
Oh.
Or me, just me.
Well, I'll begin with Maggie. I remember that after your dad and mother after Chuck and Diane were married, I was eager to make friends with Maggie, but I learned a long time ago you can't make friends too fast. You got to just let them make friends with you. And so I hadn't pushed it a lot, but I don't know, I think maybe I asked several times, and finally one time Maggie came over and spent some by herself. Her mother brought her over, and she spent some time with me. I remember we talked about those what are those things?
Locusts?
Yeah, locusts. There was locusts all over the place, and we kept picking those up, and we talked about them and how the noise they made and all that sort of stuff. And we went up to the fairgrounds and walked around at the fairgrounds and everything, and we talked, and we talked about some leaves. We picked some leaves and did some things, and we had a real good time. I thought she was having a good time, and I heard later from your mother, from her mother Diane, that she said, I don't know why I didn't want to go over and see Grandma before, I didn't know why I didn't go over there before, because she'd just been worried about having a good time, but she did, and that made me feel good. I've always remembered that. And with your brother, there's a lot of things I remember, but the scariest thing I remember is one time when he hid from me, and I was so frantic. I called your mother, and she called your father, and they both came, and your mother found him somewhere up behind something in one of the bedrooms. But I would have just rather cut off my hand than call Diane and tell her that I couldn't find Brian. But I thought I'd better after about 10 minutes or 15 of yelling and hollering and running all over. And I don't know why you didn't tell me where he was, if you knew. I thought about that afterwards. I wondered if you really didn't. I don't know if you didn't know where he was or whether you just were keeping quiet.
I don't remember this.
Well, of course, you wouldn't have been very old because Brian was 2 something, I think, and you would have been 4 something, so you wouldn't have been. But it just scared like they said. Do you ever hear this expression? Scared the pea wadding out of me, to tell you the truth. And of course your mother came and she found him right away. But he was kind of a booger for thinking it was fun to hide from people. I got so I wouldn't let loose of his hand if we went out shopping, because otherwise I'd have to be running through the clothes and the grocery aisles and so on looking for him, because he thought it was the greatest fun to have people looking for him, I remember that. Now about you, I don't know, Abby, I'm trying to think. What'd you ask about? Was it something that ornery or something that I remembered or what? I'm trying to think. I know I was kind of disappointed when you absolutely wouldn't take dancing lessons anymore. I thought your outfits and you looked so cute and you did so good and everything, and I was really kind of disappointed. But then I thought, my gosh, this is a girl's got a mind of her own, and I knew that was what it was going to be. From then on, somebody knew what she wanted to do and what she didn't want to do, and I kind of admired that. I never have liked people that you could influence too easily. I like people who knew their own mind.
What are some of your hobbies, or your favorite hobbies, or have they changed throughout the years?
Oh, not a great deal. I've been an avid reader all my life, and I guess you would say, if you had to say, do I have one top, I mean, the thing that I would miss most if I couldn't do all the things I do, I suppose, would be reading, you know. That's why I have kind of a horror of my friend. I feel so sorry for her, who has gone blind, and another friend that I knew, there was a neighbor who went blind. I just can't imagine how you get through life if you can't see. I can imagine not hearing. You know, there's times when you think, gosh, that'd be a blessing if you couldn't hear things, but I can't imagine not being able to see things or not being able to read. And I love reading. I've been an antique collector, partly dealer in recent years. I've loved antiques all my life, you know. When I was a child, one of the things I remember most vividly was when I promoted it. My grandpa helped me some, and some of the neighbor kids helped some. We built a regular log house. Yeah, I don't suppose it was very much, really, but it was really built out of logs. It was a playhouse, but basically it was what it was, but it was made out of logs, because I was so enthralled with all the pioneer stories, you know, and I wanted to live. And so we got a kettle and we tried to boil things and eat things, you know, and they cooked like they did, you know, and that sort of thing. And that was something I remember from my childhood that was really fun, you know, kind of hard. Then I had a tree house. It wasn't a tree house, it was just a couple of boards. But if I wanted to read, and if I wanted to go get away from my little sisters, that's where I went. I went up in the tree because they couldn't get up there, and I'd get up there and read, you know, and they'd be hollering at me, and I wouldn't answer, you know, and they could. I don't know. Sometimes I think they knew I was there, but there wasn't anything they could do about it because they weren't big enough to get up there, and I enjoyed that.
What about, we kind of briefly touched on your favorite music. What about favorite movies, favorite books, favorite places?
Well, I suppose people, today I think it was kind of dumb, but I thought was Gone with the Wind was a wonderful movie, and I sat there and cried, and I saw it probably, my dad had a theater, so, you know, I was home. I must have seen it 3 or 4 times while he had it. He ran it for a week, you know, because it was so popular. And I have never forgotten my feeling there, but I don't think it's the best movie I ever saw, but somehow or other it moved me a great deal, and I suppose it probably wouldn't affect me in exactly the same way today as it did when I was a young girl, you know. But, and Gary Cooper was my hero when I was a young person. I thought I went to every Gary Cooper movie there was, and several of my friends felt the same way, and we used to go together and just swoon over him, you know, because we thought he was so handsome. And what else did you have?
Favorite book?
Oh, well,
Gone with the Wind?
no, I read it. By the way, I think I've got a story about Gone with the Wind. I'd been waiting for it, and I went to the library all the time. The library was only open in our town 2 afternoons a week, but I went down both afternoons. I've been waiting for them to get a copy of Gone with the Wind in, and I found out that they had a copy of The Wind. So I rushed right down to the library, and fortunately it was still there, and I checked it out. I brought it home at 2 o'clock, and I finished it at 5:30 the next day. I read all night long.
And all day.
All afternoon and all night. My mother came in twice because the light was on, you know, in the middle of the night, in the early morning. And when she didn't, I was old enough. She didn't really say, oh, you know, if I'd have been 10, she'd have probably said, turn off your light and give me that book. But she didn't. I was in high school, you know, and I read that. That's the longest reading session I can ever remember, but I read lots of times. I read till 2 or 3 o'clock on books that I liked real well. I was quite an avid reader. And, you know, it's kind of hard for me to come right up with all the ones. There's been a lot of them that I've liked real well, but...
You don't have to pick one.
Yeah.
What's the thing you're most proud of in your life? Some accomplishment or... if there was one thing you could think of.
Well, if I hate to sound smug, but I'm going to. There's a couple of things I'm proud of, and one of them, I suppose it's kind of smugness. But I've been proud that I've been a good student, and I've considered myself an intelligent person, and I've been proud of that, to tell you the truth. I have been. I'm probably too proud, because it's probably nothing that I did anything about. I just probably inherited some pretty good genes, but I've been proud of the fact that in general, if I set my mind to it, there's not been much of anything I couldn't have learned to do, and that sort of thing. And I've been proud of that. And what was the question now? There was something else I was going to tell you about that wasn't quite so smug as that.
Well, any achievement or anything you're most proud of in your
Well,
life?
the other thing I'm most proud of is I'm proud of my family. I love my family, and I'm proud of them. And they mean an awful lot to me. So, I think in a way that's something to be proud about. If you can get people grown up that you have raised that are admirable people, well, I think that's something to be proud about, and I am proud of that.
Just got a few more questions.
Okay.
You've said that if you could have been anything, you might have wanted to be a lawyer or a journalist,
Yes.
and you
Yeah.
did become a journalist, but is there anything else, if you could have been anything in the world?
No. No, those have been, yeah, I guess I have to tell you, when I took my test for graduate exams, those tests that they give you to see what you're good at, you wouldn't believe the thing that came out first. Ministry. Not that I ever thought about it, but in fact I was amazed, that would come out, but I was happy enough with what I did, happy enough with I think in general I've been mostly a happy, contented person, and it wasn't that I didn't think things could have been better, but mostly they weren't things that made me terribly unhappy. It was just things I thought could have been improved, but that sort of thing.
If you could pass on any words of wisdom, what would it be?
Oh, heavens. I don't believe in passing on words of wisdom very much. Not that I haven't done it, but I don't really believe in it. I'm not sure it does any good, but one of the things, and I don't think this has a thing to do about people's traditional idea of success or not, but I do believe that people are happiest, and the world would be a much better place if everybody remembered to treat other people, with kindness and justice. And I do believe that's the fact that they don't is the basis of all of our troubles in the world. And if we would all treat everybody the way we would like to be treated, we'd probably have an extremely happy world, But so I would say to people, keep that in mind when you're dealing with folks. Treat them as you would like to be treated.
Do you have any regrets?
Well, I would have liked to have had one or two more children. But, by the time I got Chuck, I was delighted to think I was going to have two, because I had about given up that I was going to have more than one, And so I would have been happy with another child or two. And I always thought 4, that's what there was in our family, and I always thought 4 was a real good. I guess people today think that's a lot, but I always thought 4 we got along just fine, and I thought that was a good round number, but didn't happen.
And this is my last question, and if anyone has any other questions, you can ask. But is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to tell me?
Oh, well, that's well, no, we've just about covered I don't don't know what I was going to say, but we've done a lot.
I guess I do have one more question. Has your life turned out as you thought it would?
Well, I lived a lot longer than I ever thought I would, for sure. I'm 91, and I never dreamed that I'd be. I used to wonder if I'd ever even see 2,000, and I've seen 9 years of it now, so far. That's, oh, I suppose everybody has things they wish they'd have done a little better and so on, but I don't have any I've been a happy person, and I don't have any serious regrets about anything, If I were going to be regretful about anything, I would have thought that there's some things that I didn't do as well as I should have, and I wish I'd have done some things better than I did, but then, that's just the way it was.
Well, anyone else have any questions?
Well, can we come back at another time and focus in on specific areas to get more details?
Sure, I enjoy this. I really do. And I think it's good. I was telling Chuck or Phil tonight when we were talking about it, he says this, and I was telling him a little bit about what you were going to do. I didn't quite understand all of it, to tell you the truth, but I said, I think it's a good idea, and like I told you, I'd intended for a long time, thinking I ought to write down a whole bunch of things, but this saves me the trouble, and and who knows when I would have ever gotten around to it, but I had been thinking, because I thought about, you always think about things once your parents are gone, you wish you'd asked them or knew about them, things you don't know, and when after they're gone, you don't have any way of finding out some of these things, but
Well, thank you for letting us film you for hours and hours and then turning off the camera now.
Well,